Welcome to Lund and the Raoul Wallenberg Institute. First of all, can you give a description of yourself?
My name is Navi Pillay. I'm a South African. And before becoming High Commissioner for Human Rights 3 years ago, I was an international judge on the Rwanda Tribunal and the International Criminal Court.
And to be High Commissioner for Human Rights, in my ears, it sounds that you have quite a tough challenge. Do you agree?
This is a very special mandate given by all the member states through the GA General Assembly resolution, and gives me the mandate to ensure the promotion and protection of human rights all over the world.
And if you would describe, how would you say the situation is for human rights today?
I will say for that kind of mandate, I'm empowered to monitor and watch out for all the gaps and violations. And I would say that there are some very critical situations where there are conflicts. For instance, in Sudan and Syria right now. But there are long-standing problems of discrimination, long-standing problems of lack of economic rights all over the world. So I attend to eminently critical matters as well as long-term matters, all geared towards getting states to honor their own obligations to protect human rights.
And would you say, are things going in the right direction or are things getting worse?
Well, I am personally full of hope, because, as I'm going to say in my speech later, there are so many human rights mechanisms now where we can call upon states to carry out their obligations. And so much effort is being done by governments all over the world. Civil society is much stronger now. Today's young girls, for instance, will not put up with the kind of discrimination against women that my generation did. So I see a steady progress in the protection of human rights and a building of human rights culture.
But if you say civil society, but how powerful is civil society compared to governments and leaders of states?
Governments are always more powerful, but the power has been given to them by civil society. And
not always, though.
Not always, in democratic tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore you see many movements today where people are claiming their rights and they want their governments to be more accountable to them for the kind of policies that they are making.
But if you work for the United Nations, and we can often see when there are conflicts, there are big powers that can block decisions and the United Nations cannot do enough. How frustrating is that for you, for instance?
Well, I appreciate that there is an institution such as the United Nations, and that a huge system of international norms and standards and treaties have been adopted by all the states. When it comes to deliberations over specific issues, countries tend to have their national agenda. Regions tend to have their regional agendas. Then there's a north-south divide, there's a rich-poor divide. And all these plays out because these are highly political questions that are being addressed in the United Nations. Sometimes you have representatives of two states sitting elbow to elbow next to each other, and yet they are at war on the ground in their own countries. Difficult situations, but at least we have an avenue to address them. I am constantly urging states not to look at human rights from their political lens or from their political agendas, but to call upon the universality of human rights and that everybody should respect all rights of all persons. I constantly remind them to keep the discussions at that level.
But at the same time, you mentioned Syria. We won't go into details, but that's a good example of where one or two big powers can block very much of what the rest of the world wants. Isn't that quite bad grade for the United Nations?
Well, I was disappointed too and said so. I addressed the Security Council twice. I addressed the General Assembly as early as April last year. So it's a year ago when I predicted that if the situation is not addressed, the opposition elements in Syria will take up arms, and this may well lead to civil war. At a time when I spoke, there were, say, 3,000 deaths, mainly caused by the agents of the government. And now this number, according to the United Nations, is 9,000. So it is extremely disappointing that the international community failed to heed the call of the Secretary General made again and again for them to take collective action.
And isn't that a good example of when it comes to a conflict? I mean, there are many nice things being said from the United Nations, but when we stand in front of a conflict, there you are with a couple of countries blocking what many others want.
I've heard the debates, and clearly the countries that objected to the first draft resolution were concerned about what happened in Libya. And that's what they were saying. They don't want military intervention. And of course the Syrians themselves were not asking for military intervention, the Libya style. So you have one intervention that is viewed unhappily by many people in the world, including governments, and that, I think, influenced the debate on Syria. But that is no excuse for failing to act to save lives. The bottom line is they should have got together and come up with some strategy to prevent the killings and stop the killings, as they've done now, finally, after more than a year, a unanimous resolution by the Security Council to send in observers.
I know you're giving a speech here at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute in Lund. The topic is human rights from rhetoric to reality. Is there a lot of rhetoric when it comes to human rights in the world today?
Firstly, let me say that we need the rhetoric because it leads to development of ideals and values. Rhetoric is what comes out of universities, out of the mouths of trade unionists and students, institutes such as the Wallenberg Institute.
But it also implies, as far as I can understand, a lot of words, less action.
And it also implies rhetoric that doesn't reflect the reality. So rhetoric must be accompanied by action. This is what I'm going to say in my speech, but it must also reflect the reality. I think the Arab Spring told us how far the rhetoric was from the reality. Shortly before the Tunisian revolution, for instance, reports published by UN agencies and other international bodies praised the situation in Tunisia, that there's economic growth, there's jobs, people are happy. And that was not what the people on the street were telling us. So there's a rhetoric not matching the reality.
If we had Raoul Wallenberg here today, how do you think he would look upon the world? Would he be disappointed?
I think that Raoul Wallenberg is a role model for someone who saw terrible things happen and didn't sit back thinking other people have to do it or it's something too big. He got in there and did his own bit. I think that he would be disappointed that his vision of human rights has not been universally implemented today. But that's the reality we live in. People have different interests. There will be corrupt people taking advantage of the situation. But I think he would motivate each and every one of us to do something about it.
But if we look back on history only some decades, there have been very few Raoul Wallenberg. Why?
If I look at my own country, South Africa, I never thought that apartheid will end in my lifetime because it was so entrenched, racism. And if you are dark-skinned, you never had vote. But there was collective action on the part of the international community not to buy South African oranges or South African wine, and all that helped to inspire us inside the country. So you need international support to motivate and inspire you, but mainly you have to believe that you are entitled to rights and to claim them. I think South Africa is a good example where collectively people did make a change without resorting to violence.
And what can we do to try to raise more kids to become something, I wouldn't say Raoul Wallenberg, but something at least in the not so far away from the ideal of Raoul Wallenberg? What can we do as parents or grandparents or as human beings?
Firstly, I think this is a very important question you've asked me. Children, the youth, how do we reach out to them? They are already there. There's a new medium we have here, the social media. I find that my office is just beginning to understand the importance of putting out a message. On Human Rights Day, we had these campaigns, the conversations, and it was listened to live by millions of people, and the questions came in. 8 million alone from Weibo, which is the Chinese website. So we are learning how to use the communication methods that young people listen to, watch, Twitter, and send messages on Facebook and so on. The other example I would like to give you is the importance of human rights education. It has to begin at school, where children respect one another, respect each other's dignity, and they don't discriminate against the other, someone who is different, somebody who is disabled, dark-skinned, or of a different religion. These values have to be instilled at school. I saw this in a school run by UNRWA, the UN institution for education in Gaza. This was a girls' school. These 8-year-olds demonstrated how they would resolve disputes, for instance, mediation, and they were talking about reconciliation from the mouths of 8-year-olds about respecting each other's dignity and equality of boys and girls. A good start. My office promotes human rights education. We have tools for them, and we distribute these materials.
And to go back a bit, you think social media can be important in the improvement of the political situation in the world?
I think that social media can. We saw it happen in Egypt and Tunis. And people are hungry for these messages. They know there is such a thing as human rights. They don't know exactly what it is. So what I say is what they've been asking for is civil and political rights, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom to protest. And they've been asking for economic and social rights and cultural rights, a right to a job, for instance, employment, proper salaries. The Occupy Wall Street and Occupy other cities have spread all over the world. And what is it that the people are asking for? They no longer want decisions affecting their life to be made by unaccountable institutions, banks, and governments who are not accountable. So they're asking for people to be at the center of economic policies and political policies.
Are you on Facebook yourself?
We are, yes, the offices. It's just incredible.
But you personally, are you active on Facebook?
No, but my 4-year-old grandson is.
So you have to start too.
I have to start, yes.
One last question. If you look 10 years ahead from today, what do you think we'll see?
I think that information that had previously been controlled by governments, editors, editorial authorities and political authorities, for instance, controlled whether a protest is reported in the press and what kind of information is put out there. I think there will be freedom of information because it will be accessible to everyone, passed on from click to click. And also people will have access to organizations such as the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to report complaints or violations. So I see this opening up and the control over the obstacles to people claiming their rights will slowly fall away. And I see all these as avenues that we should be tapping ourselves. If we want to be of service to the people, then we use social media.
So let's finish on this very positive note. Thank you so much for coming to Lund and Raoul Wallenberg Institute.
Thank you. Thank you very much.